Hello and welcome back to our Tuesday Talks with Hannah. I'm Hannah Levin from Heartfelt Wellbeing, and today's Tuesday Talk is focused on food combining. So food combining is something that Ayurveda purports quite a lot. We look at how foods digest together, foods that are creating what we call ama or toxins in the system when they are put in the body together, and foods that create more harmonious experiences. There's a lot that is out there in terms of healthy food combining, and it's something that a lot of people don't know much about. Like, we think just eat food, right? Just eat some food and that's good. We kind of go to the next level, which might be eating seasonally and looking at what's showing up at the farmer's market. So then we say, just eat seasonally, and that's great. That's a great place to start. And then another level is to look at food combining, because we don't want to unnecessarily be creating toxins in our system, a toxic environment, or over time creating disease, which ultimately is what happens when we build up more and more and more toxins of incompatible foods being digested at the same time. What's interesting to me is that I often see recipes for things that are horrible food combining that are touted as being really fabulous. New recipes is the new hot thing. And so it's kind of interesting because there are chefs out there that really see, food as a creative playground, which is fun in a way of, taking different ingredients and really thinking of flavor palettes and how things can appeal to us. However, we get ourselves in trouble when we eat things over and over and over again that are poor food combining. So along those lines, I want to share with you some food combining guidelines. As with anything that I share from the standpoint of what I coach and the teaching that I do, I really want to invite these things to be received as guidelines, not rules. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, because we're living in a world where we can't live a happy, easeful life and be ultimately rigid about everything, right? So coming back to, we want to do the best we can where we are with what we have. My favorite Teddy Roosevelt quote, that there's going to be times where you're going to eat things that aren't compatible, okay? And enjoy it. There's some things I'm going to share with you today that you're probably going to be like, oh man, I really like that, So have it every once in a while, but don't do it all the time. And it's what we do, our habits are what we do consistently over time that create the results of our lives, okay? So don't make it a consistent habit to practice poor food combining. Make it a consistent habit to practice great food combining, and thereby you will celebrate having fabulous health, okay? So these are guidelines, not rules. We don't want to beat ourselves up when we're not doing them. We want to be compassionate and kind to ourselves. So I'm going to start just with some general overview of how we want to be eating. This is different from the standard food pyramid, which is supported by industry and money and advocacy in terms of lobbying for industry dollars. Okay, so throw out the food pyramid that is propagating our mainstream culture. And let me just say that what we want to be eating most of is plants. And within the plant field, we want to be eating mostly vegetables. Okay, so when we look at just the environment in our gut, one of the things that we want to look at primarily is cultivating an alkaline environment. So you've heard me talk a bit prior, if you've watched other teachings that I've done or if you're in one of my programs, about the gut microbiome and how important that is. So gut microbiome is very important. So our gut bugs, we want them to be happy and healthy gut bugs that communicate really important, healthy, aligned messages to our brains and aren't addicted to things like sugar and lactose and things like that. We also want to be creating an alkaline environment in our bodies through the foods that we eat. And that is done primarily through eating vegetables and some fruit. So some of us don't eat very much of either of those things. And that's a place to start, is to incorporate more and more and more vegetables into your meals. And thereby creating a more alkaline environment in your gut, which will create health for you over time. So given that as a baseline, here are some good Ayurvedic guidelines. And hopefully I'll have time today to go into a little bit more of the history of where these came from. So one guideline is to keep your proteins simple and separate. By that, we mean, so if you don't know this already, Ayurveda is not a vegetarian system. Animal proteins and products are included in Ayurveda, but in very minimal amounts, meaning that they are very dense and challenging to digest. And so we want to eat them in small amounts. It doesn't mean that we're not getting enough protein, but it means we're not bombarding our digestive tract with a quarter pounder or a big hunk of chicken or bison or whatever that is, that it might be something that's mixed in with other things. And we don't want to pile them on together. So, I mentioned the quarter pounder, so that with cheese, with bacon, do you get the picture? Like this creates a very, not only challenging digestive picture, but also a very acidic environment. So meat and proteins in general are acidic. So keep your proteins simple and separate. So keeping them in like having one protein, and this isn't just animal protein we're talking about too, like beans. So if you're having beans, just have one type of bean, not 5 types of beans, right? If you're having lentil soup, just put lentils in there, not like 15 other beans, right? And things like dairy, cheese, things like that, those are not so good to combine with proteins. So our, burritos are with cheese and sour cream and meat. Chili is something that I often give as an example where people are having meat and beans together. That is a digestive nightmare. I don't know about you, but most people I know that eat chili do not feel fabulous afterwards, right? So this is really what we want to be looking at too. Like, hear what I have to say today, take your notes, run some experiments. What we're going for is that we feel good. Our energy doesn't drop. We don't get gassy and bloated. We're not having unpleasant elimination experiences, that we don't have brain fog. Like all of these things, we don't want to just say, oh, I feel fine, and not notice that there's actually challenges. I will also add, before I go on to the next guidelines, is that this really depends on your digestive strength. So the healthier you are, the younger you are, the more pitta, healthy pitta you have in your system that's going to support your digestion, the more lenient you can be with these things, okay? Over time, you'll wear down if you're not following good food combining guidelines. you're going to experience a wearing down of these things. So a lot of folks, when they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s, might say, I used to be able to eat blah, 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 and now I can't. Or like, I used to feel fine when I mean, think about kids. They can kind of eat whatever, and most kids, and they're generally fine with it. So our daughter likes to point out to me, she'll be like, look, Hannah, this is such bad food combining and it's so yummy. But I'm glad that she knows that. I don't stop her from eating things. Like, sure, enjoy it and notice how you feel. And as she ages, she'll have that knowledge, right? That it's not as easy once you start getting older. If you do have more challenged digestive system, a more challenged digestive system or digestive issues, adhering to these food combining guidelines is going to be more beneficial for you to help rebuild your digestive strength, what we call Agni in Sanskrit, and to help you support a really balanced, healthy system. So just keep that in mind. Like everything in Ayurveda, those 3 questions of for who, when, and how much are really what it comes down to. Okay, so these guidelines are helpful, but really it comes down to who are we talking about? When are they doing this? Both in terms of the time of day, in terms of their time of life, when, and then how much. Like, is it a little bit of goat cheese on the beans and rice? That's not going to be as big of an issue as combining lots of cheese and lots of heavy cream and lots of eggs in a quiche, say, and bacon. Right? Which might taste really good, but how do you feel afterwards? Right? And then also we want to notice the coating on the tongue. What does that report to us as the congestion that's in the system? So dairy is best eaten alone or with some grains, and to be heated. We tend to eat dairy cold, which is very strange in terms of our digestion. So in general, traditionally, dairy was warm. It was freshly made, for one thing. So we would warm milk and add digestive spices to it and drink it that way. Yogurt is warm. Soft cheeses warm. So having those warm, but then also not combining them with other heavy things. So thinking about back to the first guideline, proteins. We don't want to be combining lots of proteins in the same meal. Put them in separate meals. So cheese mixed with or drinking milk when you're eating a meal that has meat in it or beans is gonna be challenging. Not gonna work out so well. So the heavier the food is, the heavier it can be for your digestion. So sometimes we need heavy foods, like during the winter. But we're aware of the state of digestion constantly too. So I'm recording this in the springtime as we're moving into the summer. We don't need so much heavy food right now. So think about all the vegetables that are coming into our environment. And then the last general guideline here is that fruit should be eaten away from heavy foods. So a lot of folks in Ayurveda say fruit should be eaten alone. I don't totally agree with that. There's definitely certain types of fruit, and I'll get into that in just a moment, that need to be eaten alone. But if foods are cooked together, like if you are cooking oatmeal, say, and you cook in some raisins and prunes, or maybe cut up a peach or some blueberries, something like that, that generally digests well together. And there is the saying that you may have heard me say before too. This is a quote from Dr. Robert Svoboda, who says, foods that are cooked together work out their differences in the pot. Now, that's not necessarily true for all things, like the chili that I just mentioned. Beans and meat cooked together isn't necessarily going to make them digestively appropriate. But things like grains and fruit, or like I made a peach, blueberry, blackberry crisp the other day, like with, oats and some maple syrup and stuff on. So, those types of things can be okay. Again, that's not something that I'm eating every single day, right? It's a special occasion kind of food. So in general, it's good to eat fruit alone. What does that look like if you want fruit to be part of a meal? I suggest that you eat fruit prior. So if you are wanting to have, an orange with your meal, eat the orange first and ideally allow maybe 15-20 minutes and then eat the rest of your meal. Okay? All of these newfangled, things like, chicken salad with oranges and grapes in it and stuff like that. They taste good, but they don't digest really well together. So just keep that in mind. And again, don't just take my word for it. Try these things and notice how you feel. It really supports you having abundant energy and clear mind and things like that. So let's look a little bit more at some guidelines, and I'm looking down here at my computer screen because I have some info pulled up here to share with you all. So I mentioned beans before. So beans do combine well with vegetables, nuts and seeds, and grains. So rice and beans is a good thing. Rice and beans with kale and sweet potatoes, that's one of my favorite dishes. That combines well together. What beans do not combine well with are fruit, milk, cheese, yogurt, so basically dairy, eggs, and meat. Okay, so that's kind of what I already went over with you. Beans and fruit, dairy, and meat do not combine well together. So there is an exception with dairy with ghee. And so ghee is clarified butter. It's used very predominantly in Ayurvedic cooking. And ghee is something that can basically combine well with everything. So ghee is seen as a medicinal food that's very healing and beneficial for the gut. Our modern science studies show us that ghee is the highest food, is the food with the highest percentage of butyric acid, which is what feeds our beneficial gut microbiota. So those gut bugs really love ghee, and it can be put in any foods. It can be used to cook with vegetables, fruits. I put some in my stewed fruit in the morning sometimes. It can be used to saute meat, you name it. So ghee is a universal food. So cheese, as we mentioned before, can combine with grains and vegetables, but does not combine with meat, beans, fruit, things like that. Okay. Same with milk. Okay. Milk can be cooked into things like rice pudding, oatmeal, things like that. Otherwise, it's best to have milk alone. And as I said before, best to have it warm and spiced. So things like golden milk are really lovely. You could just add, if you don't want it to be kind of sweet like that, you can add just a little pinch of cumin to the milk, and that helps the digestibility there if you do drink dairy. Eggs combined with grains and non-starchy vegetables, not with beans. Breakfast burrito, not so good. Not so much with other dairy like cheese. So I already went over that. Fruit in general can go well with other fruit that has similar qualities. And in general, we want to, if we are combining it with other things, we want to cook it together. We definitely do not want fruit to be with beans, meat, eggs, things like that. And of course, there's little exceptions, right? Like what about if you make healthy pancakes or crepes or something like that, and you put some fruit on there? There's eggs that are in the batter. Enjoy it. It's probably not something you're having every day, right? But just keep these things in mind. So lemons and limes are fruits that are acidic, and they create an alkaline environment in your gut. So that's kind of cool. And they also help with digestion, that sour taste. So these are fruits that you can squeeze on things. So, you might be used to putting some lemon on your fish, something like that. That's fine. So that's a fruit exception. Okay. That's what we call a pravab in Ayurveda. It's like the exception to the rule or to the guideline. Now, in terms of fruits, melons are where things get very definitive. Okay. So melons are fruits that do not combine with any other food because they are mostly just sugar and water. So this is your honeydew, cantaloupe, watermelon. Keep this in mind as we come into the summertime and there's lots of melons around. That melons digest super fast, and when there are other foods in the gut with the melons, the melon ferments and putrefies basically and creates a toxic setup in your gut. So the saying is eat melon alone or leave it alone. Okay? So if you go to your 4th of July picnic and there's lots of watermelon along with, all the other things at the picnic, eat the melon first. Okay, so a lot of times in the summer, melon will be served as a dessert. Bad news. Okay, eat it first. Have it as an appetizer, wait 20, 30 minutes, and then have your meal. That melon will have gone through your system. Another way to eat melon that I think is really fun is to have it as an early or later dinner. So you could have like a half of a cantaloupe or, a bunch of watermelon or something that is just a cooling, juicy evening meal. If you've eaten a nourishing enough lunch and then you get to the evening and you're not super hungry, you can just have an evening meal of melon, which can be fun to do every once in a while. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So vegetables in general are another food that can be combined with lots of other foods, lots of vegetables. So we want to think about 75 to 80% of our meals being vegetables. And that's a big shift for a lot of people. A lot of the women that I coach, it's a big shift to start thinking about the primary ingredient in every meal is vegetables. And it can be really fun and super tasty. Our culture is set up so differently to focus on grains and meat and dairy, and that is not beneficial for us over the long term. It's not the nutrients that we need. It sets up an acidic environment in our system. So focus on vegetables. Yay, vegetables. So vegetables can kind of combine with anything. You can make vegetables with beans. You can make vegetables with meat, vegetables with grains, vegetables with eggs, you name it. Okay? Go for it. Let's see. Some other things that you might want to think about are baked goods. So baked goods in general are very heavy, and so combining those with other heavy foods. So back to our cheeseburger example is to have like a bun with the cheese, the bacon, the burger, right? That's a lot for our digestive system to handle. So you might try, if you're having a burger, to have it without a bun, or to make a veggie burger that you have on a bun. But kind of notice, and again, this goes back to each of our individual digestive strength, how that can feel for you, and really keeping the dense foods to a minimum in terms of the larger picture of your meal. Vegetables and then some denser food, but that's not the majority of the meal. Okay, so I do want to point out that a lot of these food combining guidelines have not originated so much from ancient Ayurveda. Some of them have. And back in the day of, 5,000 years ago, or over 5,000 years ago, in India, where Ayurveda originated, there were some really important food guidelines that were in place. A lot of those also were understood to be seasonal and doshically appropriate, right? We haven't really even gotten into here exactly what it looks like for each dosha, and I'm not going to get into that today. This is a just kind of baseline thing to start exploring. On top of that, though, there's new information that has come into our awareness and has now been touted as Ayurvedic food combining guidelines that were really developed in the United States in the past couple hundred years. And so I just want to point that out, that a lot of the guidelines now that are shared as being Ayurvedic food combining guidelines are newer in the sense that they have been added to what the Ayurvedic teachings are because of the West's misinformation or lack of understanding of how foods combine together. So I do want to say that there's this doctor named William Howard Hay who first introduced food combining as an issue in health in the United States in 1911. Okay, so that was a while ago, and what he found was that food combining really affected how people's health played out. Brilliant, right? So Ayurveda has known this for over 5,000 years, and now he was running experiments with himself and some of his patients and clients that were really focused on what happens with eliminating poor food combining and certain food combining guidelines. And so he really looked at what creates alkaline and acidic environments. So just to review, vegetables and some fruit are really key for creating an alkaline environment. And even acidic fruits like the limes, like the lemons, help with creating an alkaline environment. The end result is alkalinity. Whereas things like meat and fish and eggs and cheese and baked goods are going to create an acidic environment. So just even understanding that is really, really important. What do we want to put our votes in for? We want to vote for an alkaline environment, not an acidic environment, which means we need to be eating more alkaline supporting foods, not less. Okay. So he also did a lot of studies with different things combining. And so I'll just leave it there. We're at time if you want to look him up and explore some more of what he found. It kind of leads us back to what I just shared with you about from the Ayurvedic perspective. So I hope this is kind of interesting and hopefully inspiring, not upsetting to you, and that it can be really kind of a fun exploration to play around with what does good food combining look like, what does it feel like, and what that can be for you this season. So cheers to your meals, cheers to your nourishment, and I'll look forward to hearing from you all about your experimentation. Take care.